What does it take to stay ahead in B2B SaaS? Winning in the margins. Welcome to the new go-to-market playbook. I'm your host, James Kaikis, Chief Revenue and Experience Officer at Testbox. In our interview series, I sit down with go-to-market operators, leaders, and industry experts who are defining the next era of go-to-market by winning in the margins. These leaders are focused on incremental innovations and non-obvious advantages that drive big results. The goal of this interview series is for you to take action in your business, so sit back, grab a notepad, and enjoy the episode. Elaine, good to see you.
Good to see you too, James.
I appreciate your time and really looking forward to our conversation today.
Same here.
You know, what's interesting is we've got to know each other over the last couple of months because you're actually the board member for Testbox, right?
I am indeed.
You know, as we think about the journey of Testbox, you've seen this company you've seen this company when they were in a different stage, and we've transitioned a lot in the last couple of years. So what's that experience been like from your perspective?
Well, if I go back to when I first met Sam, I think the thesis that was in my head when we made the original investment was the buyer's journey is changing, and the way that people want to buy software is very different. And I think there's a lot of things at play here. One, nobody loves having to talk to salespeople over and over again. But honestly, if you look at the shift in demographics, all of a sudden you started having millennials in positions of power and in buying roles. They buy very differently. They want to self-educate. They want to have, peer validation. They want to go and learn as much and then eventually talk to a human if they have questions. And this idea of having a marketplace where people could come and actually test different things side by side and go beyond self-education, literally do self-validation, made a lot of sense to me. I think what we learned over time is that, and we knew this going in, the biggest existential risk to that model was SEO game was done, like G2 and figure out every other one. That game was cooked. So you had to figure out, how do you get the volume of people in there? It was going to be easy to aggregate the demos. That part didn't feel hard. It was, how do you get people to actually go there? And I think that nut was a really hard one to crack. And I think what we learned over time was that where the revenue was being made and where the biggest hair on fire problems were actually for sales teams. And it was for sales teams to accelerate their funnel process and really help buyers do as much of that education, but in something that felt authentic to them. And so I think that what I've seen too is they've really found this red hot center of a pain where they were either throwing sales engineers at the problem, or even worse, customers were sold something and then they get into the product.
Totally.
And now they're like, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to do. So you have misaligned expectations.
Yes.
And so they're enabling sales teams to align expectations, to accelerate that sales process, and then also make sure that your customer success team has a much easier job.
Totally.
And that's really where now I feel like there's a ton of acceleration and really found kind of product market fit.
Yeah, I love hearing your perspective on that. And I guess from your perspective, though, if we take a step back, did you feel like there was as much of an existential crisis with that previous model that maybe Sam feels and talks about today?
I think it was one of those things where we could have banged our head against a wall for another year or so, and I don't think it would have cracked the nut. To that question, probably, it felt like the business was not going to be, VCs like to use the term venture-backed business.
Yes, totally.
And so to continue to survive, having taken venture capital, you need to be on a high-growth trajectory. And with that current model, it didn't feel like they were able to figure that part out, whereas now you can clearly see the path to that.
Right. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because marketplaces are so hard, right? You're going to two different audiences that have different needs, different values. I'm glad that Testbox made the pivot, and I will tell you even how I got involved in this company is I'm an LP and go-to-market fund, and I know of Testbox through the investment, and I was like, oh, I love this. This is amazing. And when Testbox pivoted to demo automation, I was like, uh-oh, like all of my partners at Pre-Sales Collective were in this space, and I was like, guys, I don't know if I can be involved with you anymore, right? And here we are a little bit later. So
what's actually interesting too is when Sam was first pitching the vision for Testbox, this was before the demo automation space existed. This was definitely not a category that was saturated like it is today. Yeah. And I think then what you started seeing was some of these companies in the early demo automation, mostly just like the screen grabbing and video on top, were starting to get real traction. And I think that was where the hole in the market and the opportunity to do much deeper tech, much deeper integrations and make it a little bit more robust really became significantly differentiated when it came to that market.
Yeah.
But that market has evolved. Like that feels like a category.
It is. And finally, right? Finally that it is, and there's some clarity on this. I want to talk about you for a little bit, right? Like tell us a little bit about your role, your current company, where you came from before, right? Because we mentioned that you're a board member from your experience at Signal Fire, but you're also a founder of your own company.
My journey in general is very nonlinear.
I love that, though. I love that.
And I always tell people, some people have a North Star and they're like, I'm going to be a partner at this law firm. And like, that's my life dream. I'm like, I'm just not that person.
Yeah.
I get bored quickly. I really like to move fast. And I started my life and career as a mechanical engineer, of all things, doing biomechanics. Thought I was going to do med devices. Learned very quickly that super slow. And I'm very impatient. So out of college, ended up joining an early stage startup as one of the first employees. And the founders were about 25 years older than me, had sold a company to HP for billions of dollars. Felt like I had a lot to learn from them.
Yeah.
I spent 5 years there. And when you're early at a company, you wear every hat and you kind of just get thrown in the deep end. And I found I'm extremely extroverted. So I loved the go-to-market stuff. I love getting to talk to customers and prospects, translate the language that they're using back to the product and engineering teams, understand needs, value propositions, things like that. So found a home for myself in the go-to-market world. And I started doing a lot of early growth hacking when that was a hot term.
Yes.
And through that, all of a sudden, I started getting these companies, mostly through our VCs, coming to me being like, hey, can you help us with this growth stuff? And through that, I started my own little side hustle.
Nice.
Mostly consulting and doing what is now called RevOps.
Oh,
not called RevOps.
Was not called it
time.
before. I love that.
Doing the integrations between Salesforce and Marketo and HubSpot and all that, setting up automations with Zapier. I love getting in the weeds. So did that on the side, and that actually brought me closer to some of the VCs, one of which was Signalfire. I started working with a bunch of their portfolio companies, and they all kept trying to hire me, kept saying no. And then one day, the founding partner asked if I had ever thought about investing. And I always joke, I'm like, I've never to this day taken a finance class in my life. I'm the least qualified person. But they believed in me and also really made it clear that there's a lot more than finance and early investing. So spent 5 years working with Signalfire as an investor there, as a partner there, and always knew I was going to start my own company.
Yeah.
So how it came to be was I started playing with generative AI in 2018.
Wow. That's early.
Very early. It was GPT-1 and Google's text-to-speech algorithm called Tacotron.
No way.
So I built a product called SoundSpot that could turn any corporate blog into a podcast.
Wow.
Very into podcasting.
Very cool.
So it would suck in your podcast, you saw your blog feed, and anytime there was a new blog post, you selected your voice. It would automatically transcribe it. It would then spit out in the voice a podcast episode and then post it on an RSS feed.
Very cool.
If you go back in time and listen to some of these, you'd laugh. I mean, it's like horrible.
So robotic, right?
So robotic, so cringy. However, at the time, it felt like magic.
Yeah.
And ended up not pursuing that full time, obviously, but I just was following the evolution of this. And fast forward to about 2021, GPT-3 launches. Huge step change in terms of quality, in terms of what you can do with it. And I really pointed my lasers from an investing perspective at what are the big companies to be built here. And coming from the marketing and go-to-market world, I felt like there was a huge gap for two reasons. One, if you look at marketing in particular, they've been the biggest offender, mostly biggest offender in terms of buying 27-point solutions and also having very specialized people that do one thing. And so the vision for what we're building at Tofu is really to rebundle the marketing stack, top and mid funnel, but also to enable teams to share information, to have omni-channel campaigns that are stitching together these disparate channels, one place with all the data that's aggregated, and then use intelligence and automation to actually help you figure out who to go after, how, increase revenue.
Love it. And I thank you for sharing that. It's super interesting. I did not know about your background there and how it's led you today. I will make a comment. What's really funny about your mention of marketing being like very specific and specialized. Coming from the solutions engineering world, when I was hiring our first marketer at TestBox, when I was owning go-to-market, I got so much feedback from marketers in my network, like, you're looking for a unicorn, like this role does this role does this. And I was so blown away because the SE role is just such a generalist role. Even if you have specialty, it's a generalist role. So it's really interesting that you say that. But I think the thing that's really on my mind is, you are an operator, you went to VC partner, you worked with a lot of companies, and now you're back to building, right? What has changed the most over the last couple of years?
Everything and nothing. I think one of the biggest changes, hands down, and this is, I would say, in the last 3 years, is if you looked historically at the rise of SaaS and the rise of technology companies, the way people got promoted was by growing your team, growing your little fiefdom. And that caused tremendous bloat. So every single person was incentivized to create headcount, hire people, collect my acorns.
Yes.
And what that built was a lot of other problems. And I think Elon and other folks have showed the world plus the recession that you can actually do a lot with way fewer people.
Yes.
Kind of massive headcount cuts that we saw, people haven't rehired. And people have now realized that they can do a lot more with fewer people. And I think I'm starting to see the early signs of the incentives changing.
Yes.
Meaning companies it's all about incentive alignment,
It is.
right?
It is.
So if you incentivize people to build their fiefdoms, they will.
Yes.
And if you can incentivize them to work collaboratively across the teams and all anchor on company metrics, now you have a very different situation. So I would say that's one of the biggest changes. I think the other biggest thing, which also is kind of incorporated in this, is incorporating AI into every aspect of building a company.
I'm so happy they brought this up because I'm very passionate about this, right? I feel like in the last decade of SaaS, we've just had growth at all costs. We've built these fiefdoms, right? If you think about the Multipliers book, they talk a lot about fiefdoms. And it's so much easier to throw heads at problems, right? And now we're being forced to do more with less, whatever you want to call it. But the reality is that things are shifting. Like the software landscape is going to be different than it was over the last 10 years, right? And I think companies have to adapt to that. And I like to think that I'm one of these people that are trying to help lead this motion of like align go-to-market function. Like I'm in a CRO-like role now, but I have never technically owned revenue in a software company. I ran my own business. I ran all the revenue there, but I come from a solutions background. And I think the way that I think about the customer journey and overseeing every aspect is probably the way more companies need to think, and not just from a pipeline and forecast perspective. So one of the things that we've talked about with a couple of guests is just the roles that are evolving in go-to-market, right? So I'm curious, you talked about the marketing aspect, but like, do you see this evolution per se of the CRO role in organizations?
CRO wasn't even a thing like a decade ago.
That's true.
Head of sales, head of marketing. One thing too, I was just one of my favorite people who is now a VC. She came more from the operating world, also as a head of marketing. She and I love to chat about this fact that go-to-market is not marketing. Go-to-market is sales, marketing, and customer success.
Totally.
Completely combined. We need to make sure that these teams are one unit. I always use the analogy of a relay race. So I used to run, and when you run track.
I was a sprinter too.
Nice. So when you're doing the handoff, you have a point in time where two runners are running in the same direction, and then two hands are on the baton. And that's how you do the handoff. And if you think about a customer lifecycle journey, the same thing has to happen.
Yeah.
If they're starting with marketing, there has to be a two-handed baton handoff between marketing and sales, and then from sales to CS. And I'm starting to see the CRO coming into play to make it more cohesive. Just like RevOps is now stitching together systems,
right?
The CRO is stitching together the go-to-market people, and also aligning on metrics, aligning on goals, shared vision, things like that.
This is so fascinating of a topic because this is something that I've been trying to talk about for a while. Is I feel like handoffs are inherently flawed. Do you have a point of view on that?
Yes, absolutely. Now in the founder role, when I think about our customers and the handoffs, obviously the most seamless thing is I do the marketing, the sales, and the CS. Super seamless. The customer has one person, they know me. But as opposed to the way most companies approach it, they're thinking about, from my company perspective, how do we do the handoff? Not from the customer perspective.
Yes.
What does it feel like to them? Like, what is their day-to-day situation, and how is that going to affect them and their success with my product?
Yeah.
And I think flipping the script a little bit and really taking a look at the handoffs and the life cycle from the customer perspective makes a lot of difference. So I can give you a really tactical thing that we've changed. Previously, ran our sales process, spent a lot of time with the champions and the buyers. We all aligned on everything. Felt great. They never touched the product until we did an onboarding.
Ooh.
And that was the first time they were introduced to CS. CS person would come and be like, great to meet you all. I've heard all about you. Let's go and show you the product. Now, that was the first time hands on keyboard. And often there was misaligned expectations in terms of functionality, in terms of workflow, things like that, because they saw me do my wizardry.
Yes.
Now, what we've done is we've moved that part into the sales process where we do a 90-minute POC.
Love that.
And the customer, we create an instance for them. The customer has hands on keyboard the whole time. We incorporate CS in that meeting. So they're actually part of the sales process. They understand the workflow. We walk through a real campaign. So it's almost like they're actually a customer already. And at that point, it's a go, no-go decision. But we've now baked it into a 90-minute POC. So we do nothing for free. We do no free trials, nothing like that. But now they already understand, like the CS person's been involved in that first campaign. And now the handoff feels seamless.
Yes, that's a fantastic tactical example. And as a solutions professional, my entire career, I was taught, don't do POCs, avoid trials, avoid that at all costs. And in my opinion, because at TestBox, we do technical validation or POC in almost every single deal that we have to show that what we're doing is not just magic, right? It actually works. And I think a lot of companies who've oversold over the last 10 years have just broken trust. And so I think that concept of the POC, especially the time-bound with an introduction of CS in the sales process, builds trust and actually sets your customer up for success long-term.
That's the idea too. And again, we're even just seeing, since we implemented this change, the shift in terms of time to success.
Yes.
And for us, that is literally time to the customer is self-sufficient on our product and using it repeatedly. So much shorter. Before, like, our product is complex and we know it, but it can do a lot. And the entire idea is it is a platform for the entire today marketing, eventually go-to-market teams to automate a lot of stuff. Now, because of the complexity, we have to handhold at the beginning. No question. And that's okay.
It's okay.
And to your point, sometimes you have to throw humans at the problem.
Yes.
However, we are trying to shorten that time to success and self-sufficiency as much as possible. And things like this have just moved the needle tremendously because, again, it's a lot about the expectations. It's a lot about the momentum, and it's working.
Yeah. How do we get more leaders bought into this concept? Because I try to defy as much conventional wisdom as possible, right? And sometimes it could be too contrarian, but it's like, why are we doing what we're doing and how do we do it differently? And a lot of the topic of these conversations are the playbooks we've been running, we think are best practices and we think that they're facts, but they're not, right? So what advice do you have for people who you want to say, hey, like, go in, get more hands-on in the sales process, do something that you wouldn't typically do or you've been taught not to do because it builds more trust?
I think there's a couple things here. One is, I think founders need to trust their leaders and give them the opportunity and onus and freedom to go and try things and come back with numbers. I think people that are data-driven tend to be able to build trust with leadership very quickly. And if you've built that trust and have that trust, you're much more likely to have that leash to go and do things like that and then report back what worked and what didn't. One other thing that I'm just seeing is a little bit more of sharing among peers. I think right now, community groups, as opposed to more of like a mentor role or things like that, it's one to many. You can actually learn from what a lot of other people are doing. And I also just think experimentation. It's try some stuff, logically think through it, but see if it works. Get feedback. Ask the hard questions. Like, I always joke to people, I didn't make this up. I learned this from somebody else, but they were joking around. They got into the CRO role. And they were trying to figure out why there was such high churn and figure out the customer success side. And so they're like, well, have we asked them if they're going to churn? Why don't we just ask the question?
Crazy concept.
And it's an uncomfortable question.
Yeah.
And I think even in the sales journey too, asking the uncomfortable questions where you're like, I just want to get the deal across.
Yes, right.
Ask the discovery questions. Ask the, what does your process look like? Ask all that stuff. More communication in general is useful.
Agreed. And something you said earlier I want to double down on is you talked about people being incentivized the right way and being incentivized on company goals. So what kind of shift have you seen, and can you provide more tactical examples of what something like that would look like?
One big shift I've seen is marketing used to not be tied to revenue goals. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes companies made, was because you always talked about the friction between marketing and sales or sales and CS or whatever. It was because people were not all go-to-market teams, were not all incentivized by revenue goals. That meant that marketing was incentivized to create MQLs, which is an arbitrary thing. What is an MQL?
We could talk all about this. So
SQLs, you need opportunities. Nothing matters except for closed won business, net revenue retention, things like that.
100%.
So if you align all of the teams on those core metrics from a top-down perspective, comp on those metrics, comp more variably. Like, you asked about unconventional. I'm willing to comp marketing as a variable comp, which no one's ever done. But why not?
Why do you think it hasn't been done, though?
I think marketers are less risk tolerant. Salespeople, very risk on. They want uncapped opportunity. They're very comfortable with eat what you kill. And it's a little bit more of a lone wolf thing. Whereas marketing, historically, the personalities that go into marketing, less risk tolerant, more collaborative, more team oriented, and a little bit more of, as we were talking, siloed in a specific function, where it feels harder to impact revenue directly. Where I think this starts to change in this kind of new paradigm is that you have marketing leaders who can be incentivized because they're they're really controlling revenue. They can. And then also, as teams become less siloed and people are wearing more hats but using AI or tools as glue, I think you can start to shift what that looks like. Customer success is an interesting one because if you think of typical comp, it's like marketing, it's 100% base. Sales, it's usually 50-50. CS is like 80-20. But again, in my mind, if they're responsible for NRR, if they're responsible for upsell, cross-sell, why are they not comp 50-50?
With you. Absolutely with you. And I'm so happy that we're talking about this topic, right? Because actually at TestBox, everyone in the go-to-market organization is either tied to the quota and the revenue of the company or has a variable based off the overall revenue success. Because revenue and customer success are everyone's job. A little unconventional thing that I did is we actually don't have a customer success team anymore, right? Customer success is a company-wide initiative. And I've had a lot of people push back on that, right? But we have our AEs and our SAs as full cycle based off how technical our product is. And it has really changed the incentives of, the solution architect and doing the POC in terms of what they need to do to get done because they have to implement what they sell. And it has changed everything.
It's really smart. I also believe fundamentally that everyone should be involved in CS, even if our engineers sit in. What we did was for the first 20 customers, we actually assigned one engineer as kind of the piggyback for each customer. So we do biweekly working sessions during the first 3 months, and we would have an engineer as you are the piggyback on this company. So they would join the working sessions just as a fly on the wall, but seeing how the customer uses the product, seeing where they fall on their face, seeing the bugs, it's so much more visceral and tangible. Amazing. That works really well.
That is fantastic. And that's something I think I'm going to take from this conversation and go incorporate because you're right. You need to be able to see everything, right? You need to be able to see, what you're building and how it impacts people at the end of the day. One of the things that I've, admire about what you're doing at Tofu is that I feel like you're really unlocking personalization at scale. Would you say that's correct?
That is very much one of the core pieces of Tofu.
Let's talk about what you're doing at Tofu and how you're achieving that.
Vision for Tofu is very grand. I think for me to leave VC ego side, want to build the next Salesforce.
Yeah,
and
sweet.
I think that we did about 40 to 50 interviews with CMOs, VPs of marketing to really understand where are the biggest pain points today, where's their willingness and ability to pay, and where is AI a really good fit. And we found two hotspots. The first is personalization at scale. And the second is, we'll call it broadly, content repurposing. It's remixing, remastering. It could be a combination of taking something big like a webinar and turning it into blog posts, social posts, ad for on-demand content, email follow-ups. Or it could also be pulling in different pieces like a Gartner report, one of our case studies, a new product page, and turning that into an ebook. These things AI is very, very good at.
Yeah.
Where it's not good is like, write me a blog post from scratch. Not good.
Yes.
So we wanted to focus on the areas where it's good. At the personalization at scale, we fundamentally believe that, kind of going back to the buyer journey and the buyer experience, if everything is more contextual to you, things that are actually your pain points, value props that are going to resonate, language that your role, your industry, whatever uses, it's better for everyone. It's better for the buyer. Again, put myself in the buyer's shoes. But it's also better for me because I can create more revenue, more opportunities with fewer people. So when we think about personalization at scale, we think about it through the entire buyer journey and across channels. Let's take it from they see an ad that's personalized to either their role, their industry, their company. They click that ad. They're taken to a web experience that's personalized to them by their role, by their company, by their industry. They fill out a form. The information they get after as a follow-up is tailored to exactly what they need. And so really thinking through the entire channel mix and trying to personalize every touch point.
I just had the mind-blown moment because, one, I love that you're building this because everyone wants to see a product they're going to buy or be talked to in their language, right? As an SC, I look back at my career, I just get so upset with my team sometimes when they were using wrong nomenclature in a process with a customer, right? Or a prospect. We literally did discovery and they told us what they call their teams, what they call their segments, all of that, and then we're using general terms, right? It doesn't allow them to get that feeling, right? So they've got to paint a picture. So the fact that you're doing that at scale, I think is extremely interesting, but I am curious, does it put more risk in the margin of error, right? If you're doing hyper-personalization and you get that wrong, does that actually hurt you more than being generic?
So here's my take on it. It's a very good question, by the way. The reason I like doing this for marketing is the cost of failure is so low. If you're healthcare, if you're legal, if you're finance, the cost of failure of making some error, very high.
That's
Somebody
very true.
gets the wrong medication, a bank account number is like the wrong bank account, high cost of failure. If you got an email that was like, "Hi, Tom, I saw that you're the head of, HR at some company," you'll laugh, but like, whatever. Cost of failure is extremely low. Every time we onboard a customer, 100% of the time, they will make some comment about like, "Oh, our data is so dirty. Our data is so messy," which is true.
Yes.
It's never going to be perfect. Even if you're going and saying, "Hey, we're creating real story," customers creating a campaign for finance leaders, CFOs, things like that. We're like testing some of them and just like looked at one and it was to an HR professional. We're like, well, that's weird. Looked up the person, they're an HR professional. So the personalization was correct.
Wow.
The person was not their ICP and somehow slipped in there. So also different cost of failure. But I think that is a risk that most people are willing to take, just given the fact that low cost of failure.
That's a fascinating concept. I've never heard of that. So that's really interesting. And the second part of your answer earlier was about the content, right? We at Pre-Sales Collective, we used to call that the content flywheel. So what we would do is we would have a webinar, we would transcribe it, turn it into a blog, and then try to turn it into micro clips. And to me, that feels like the most basic thing to do is to repurpose your content. But I think from your experience, most companies are not doing that.
Most people don't, because it's a lot of work. So let's take the webinar thing. What most people do is they send a generic email after the webinar saying, "Thank you for attending or registering."
Yep.
That's it. What we do out of the box, we've actually templatized a lot of common workflows. So for a webinar, you just dump in the raw video file. We will transcribe it. We turn it into a blog post, multiple social posts, email sequence to the attendees, email sequence to the registrants. And then we also extract all the best quotations and then any statistics that were mentioned.
Wow.
And now this is all part of a campaign. Yeah. Next one you just dump it in again, and now you can rinse and repeat.
That's really interesting. And I think like you said, if you have less people, you need to be smarter about how you work. And I think that personalization, kind of tying both concepts together is really interesting, especially for us at TestBox, right? Is that we have had some success in a couple of different categories. And we have found that there's like almost a bit of like FOMO when you're talking to 3 or 4 companies that are very competitive against each other. They find out they're not using, they're the outlier not using the solution. And then talking to them, having landing pages that speak their language, that show similar examples, that to me has got their attention faster than almost anything else.
Literally this morning was with a customer, and the campaign we were working on is they have 3 main competitors. They have lists of people that they knew were on the competitor, and they wanted to do an us versus them campaign. So we created landing pages, email sequences, then ads, but they were hyper personalized to each company and talking about nuances of why they thought their product was a better fit. So stuff like that, great fit.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to turn a little bit toward, what the next couple of years of software look like. I think your product generally itself is cutting edge and kind of on that bleeding edge of what organizations should be doing. But do you think that beyond what you're building on your own product perspective, is there one big trend that's happening in go-to-market right now that you think is going to shape the future of software?
Fewer tools, fewer people. And I think that means 2 things. One, people are looking to shed these point solutions. I saw this back when I was on the VC side before I even started Tofu. There was a clear, consistent need among revenue leaders to go-to-market leaders in general to have fewer tools and also to make them all work together, because data silos are really hard to make sense of and then hit your numbers.
Yes.
So fewer things, better data. No question there. And then I think with the fewer people, it's where can we use automation or AI tools as the connective tissue between the humans that we still need. I'm a still huge proponent that we need the humans on the go-to-market side to do the creative and the strategic. Mm-hmm. Now that means setting goals, setting strategy, understanding your ICP, understanding what should our KPIs look like, creative, branding, messaging, things like that. Also relationship building. So I still think we are going to have sales. I think sales is going to be pushed further and further down funnel.
Yes.
Where marketing and AI and customer self-serving are going to be a lot more upfront through middle of funnel. And then at the very end, the human is going to build the relationship, deal with legal, deal with procurement, deal with security, that kind of stuff. And so I think that's going to be a big shift over the next few years as well.
I love that response. And I'm going to dig into one thing. You said sales pushing further and further. I was talking to a company recently who told me that their AEs now get comped once a product goes live.
Meaning post-implementation?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I like that a lot because I think you also want to incentivize sales to close the right deals. And so if you're saying, hey, sales, we are going to generate better, higher quality pipeline for you, and you're not responsible for that. We're actually going to do that. Now you really need to make sure alignment is there. You have all the pieces in place. Yep. You understand what the timeline is going to look like. That should all be done in the sales process. So I love that.
I do too, right? And I think a lot of traditional leaders that I've talked about, sales leaders, they push back on that because there's a conventional wisdom of like they should only be responsible for getting a deal in the door and that's it. But I just tend to feel like sales teams build so much trust to get to that signature and then they say, see you later, right? And the reality is, and I've presented on this at a couple of conferences, if you think about the customer journey, right? We've lost sight of the customer because the customer's journey is really just starting when the contract happens. And if we think about, the leaky bucket or whatever it is like they've been sold a dream and then there's other teams that have onboard a nightmare and there's no repercussions for selling a bad deal.
And I think one thing I saw during the last recession was that the numbers everyone was anchoring on was net revenue retention. And I think if you really think through that as the number, you can also start to see how does sales getting bad revenue in the door affect that number?
Yes.
Let's go and re-incentivize them differently. How do we really incentivize CS to make sure that we're getting people implementation as quickly as possible, up to speed as quickly as possible? Yeah. And then you have the opportunity to do upsell, cross-sell.
Agreed.
Which is also, actually, I'm curious to get your take on this. Who's responsible for that, and how do you align that best among the go-to-market team?
I wasn't expecting you to reverse questions on me.
Sorry.
I like it. No, I love it. For us, we've gone full lifecycle AE SA, so they are in pairing on the account. And when we close a customer, we understand where the revenue opportunity. Are we wall-to-wall on day one, or is there upsell opportunity? So let's use a customer like Intuit, for example. Intuit is such a large customer and such a large account that even when the signature happens and we start the implementation, the selling is not done. We've had multiple upsells within just a couple of months because we don't stop. And I think I actually was highlighted in a newsletter recently and talked about that motion. And I got a couple of messages about it being like, I wish more people thought about this because sales is a long game, right? And if you have short-term thinking, you naturally get a deal, you wash your hands of it and move on. But the reality is there could be so much upside in those accounts. And that's the motion that we're building at TestBox. And when you have a full cycle solution architect and account executive, they know this account. They know the business, they know all the key stakeholders. And then we are taking programmatic approach to adoption, utilization, all of those metrics to understand where they're finding value so that we can scale this.
I love that approach. I think that makes a ton of sense.
I think for me, going from solutions professional to entrepreneur to like back to the go-to-market seat, I just think about things a little bit differently. And I think about my own journey of one, being a solutions engineer and selling a deal and moving on. I'm very proud at like maybe 2017, I created an SE team just for our customer accounts because we had upsell and expansion. I was like, let's dedicate someone to this. And then I think about myself as an entrepreneur. We sold multi-six-figure sponsorship deals. And I was essentially responsible for making sure that relationship continued to go well. And I think that just showed me, obviously it's a little bit different, but we were delivering value all the time. If I would have just sold the deal and handed it off to my team and said, see you later, we wouldn't have had that upsell the next year. We wouldn't have the renewal. We wouldn't been able to sell $350,000 a year sponsorships if we were just kind of see you later type perspective.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to the previous conversation around really putting yourself in the buyer's shoes too. Yeah. What is the best experience for them? That continuity, that relationship building, but also you being able to see, or the team, the continuous team, being able to see the pockets of opportunity. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're coming in a little bit blind, you can't even see them.
I think to your point, you nailed it, right? To your point earlier about like the silos and the fiefdoms, we've just been kind of taught to like live in this box. And the reality is like customer journeys and customer success with your product, they blend, they merge. There's always people who have joint responsibilities. And I think we need to see more of that generally.
Could not agree more.
It has been awesome having you here. I really appreciate it. It's been great getting to know you over the last couple of months. Super excited for what you're building at Tofu. And thanks for continuing to support TestBox and all that we're doing.
Can't wait to see what the next few years hold for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care. Thanks for joining me.
Of course.